Well, hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle, the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Rafe, and, if you were looking for having Harry on the show today, you know what? It ain't going to happen. So you got me. It's a little solo things. Harry's out doing some very important things that we will discuss in the future, but it's part of the grand plan. So here we are alone today, but alone with the world's greatest listeners. You guys have made us the global top 10% podcast that we are. As usual, you can reach us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com and, send us your questions. We'll provide you answers. We'll think up new topics, or we'll just ignore what you send, something like that. And we will appreciate what you do for us because, that's the kind of folks we are. So today is, and hit the 5-star button. Okay. The smiley stars, tell a friend to listen, get a free episode. We are, like I said, we are an independent podcast, and we rely on you sacrificing your good name to tell your neighbors and friends about us. So we very much appreciate that. And you are our marketing arm. And for that, we are grateful. So, hey, today is it's a little bit outside of normal topic, and part of that is because we're gonna touch on some sports things, and generally we avoid two fundamental topics generally, and one of them is politics, because if we start going politicking, we're gonna tick off half of our audience one week and the other half the next week, and we'll have nobody left. And if we talk sports, well, there's people out there that can do better sports than we can, and if you want to listen to somebody rant and rave about sportsy things, then there are plenty of podcasts to do that. But this is kind of in our wheelhouse, because we're going to talk about probability and models, and we're going to come around to our typical Bufnagle-y things. We're going to talk about probabilities and wagering, and maybe you gamble at your own risk, right? We all know this, but I want to talk about the concept, because we all take gambles and we all take risks with everything we do in life and how we make choices. So we're going to talk about two sportsy things related to wagering, and one of them is the NCAA tournament, the men's basketball tournament that's going to be coming up here in a little over a month, I would guess, depending on when this drops. Yeah, probably a little over a month. And the other one is a football strategy namely in the NFL. The idea of should you go for two after you score, or should you go for it on fourth down, or should you punt or kick a field goal, that sort of thing. There's risk and rewards and all those things. And I want to talk about how these things relate to wagering and how we make decisions with regard to wagering and that sort of thing. So the first thing is going to be this NCAA tournament thing. And every spring, the how should I call them? The major men's college basketball tournament takes place, and there's a women's tournament too. The men's tournament seems to have a lot more cachet, perhaps. It has a lot more following. People who never follow these sports seem to follow things when it comes time to tournament time, and there's all sorts of exciting things about why people love this tournament. It's a 64 team. Essentially a 64 team. Yes, I know there's 68 teams, but there's 64 teams, and they are they're grouped into what's called a bracket, and it is a 6-round single elimination tournament for practical purposes. That's what it is. And there's some nuances here or there about that, but we're going to talk about the 64 teams, and there are 6 rounds of single elimination, and the teams are seeded, which means that the people who are in charge of inviting these teams to the tournament, they look at past performance. They look at where these how good these teams have done during the season and how likely they are to win. And they rank these teams within each of 4 16-team regions. They rank them 1 through 16, 1 being the best and 16 being the worst. And those are called the seeds. And what that does is that that specifies who plays who in which round. So in the first round, the 1 seed gets to play the 16 seed, because the 1 seed's the best one and the 16 seed's the worst one, and they have to play. And then the winner of that one plays the winner of the 8-9 game, the 8 seed against the 9 seed. So the better you are, the easier path you have to the championship is the idea. And the reason you do that is you would like to have the two best teams meet each other at the end of the tournament is what you would like. You'd like to have them, jointly climb their way to the top and fight it out on the final day. It makes for good theater, makes for good TV, and that's why CBS and its affiliates pay billions of dollars to show you these things. And there are some of the lower seeded teams. Now, lower means actually the number's higher, so it's a little bit confusing. Some of the teams that aren't quite as good, the 14 seeds, 15 seeds, 16 seeds, those are long shots. They don't win very often. When they do, it's big news. The 16 seed has only won over the last 25 or 30 years. Has only won twice, I think. Maybe 3 times. I know the number one team in the nation last year lost in the first round to a 16 seed. Purdue went down, and you can argue why that is the case and whether or not it has to do with, guys going pro or difficult schedules or bad refereeing or whatever it is. But there's, it's a very rare thing for a 16 to beat a 1. And for a 9 to beat an 8, that's almost a coin flip. So there's this tradition that happens typically it used to be like in office pools. Everybody in the office gets together. They get a copy of the bracket before any of the games are played, and they say, "Well, I think Arizona is going to beat Georgetown or whatever it is, in whatever round those are." And you fill out the bracket. You estimate what you think is going to happen. And there are 64 teams, and everybody loses once by the end of the tournament, except one team. So there are 63 games. So you have to pick. If you want to pick the perfect bracket, you have to pick 63 games correctly. And that's a very difficult thing to do. In fact, it's hard to get half of them. And the other problem is if you miss somebody early on and you pick that guy to go all the way to the final game, then all the ones that follow along that the rest of the bracket, those are going to be wrong. Those games are going to be wrong. So it is it's a challenge to have a good bracket, as they say. And people do this, they may do this in the office. Everybody throws in $10 and the winner gets pizza or something like that at the end of the tournament. Or there are other things, like you can go online and you can fill out a bracket online and the winner gets $1 bajillion because there's 80 bajillion people on there and some beer company sponsors it or something like that. So there are ways to estimate these brackets, is what you're doing, trying to guess what's going to happen. And this is a matter of much consternation for lots of people. People try to get a good bracket. They want to win these competitions. They may invest lots of money if they're in like a number of office pools, or they may put nothing on the line but spend time filling out little brackets online and then watching to see if they make money at the end and get, free tickets to a game or something. So the question becomes, how do you do this? How do you pick teams when you fill out your bracket? And there's a very easy way to do it, and it results in actually very good outcomes from one perspective, but not the perspective you would like. And the easy way to do it is to pick the teams on your bracket relative to the seeding that the tournament committee has given these teams. And if you do that, you will do well over the course of your lifetime if you always pick the 1 to beat the 16 and the 2 to beat the 15 and the 5 to beat the 12 and the 8 to beat the 9. And then when the 8 plays the 1, you pick the 1. All right. So if you always pick the better seeded team, you will in the end come up with a bracket that does probably better on average across long-term numbers of tournaments than somebody who uses a different strategy. But what happens, and this is an interesting thing as a statistician, it's true what I just said, is that that strategy of picking based on seeds, that strategy a will produce more games won for you on your bracket over the course of, over a long run, over an average, a long-term average. But what's interesting is for any given pool, there are going to be upsets. There are going to be times when the 12 seed beats the 5, or even the 16 beats the 1. And there's always going to be somebody in your office pool, I don't know, Gladys over there in finance decides to pick the teams based upon maybe the dominant mascot theory. She, if the Tigers play the Blue Jays, then she'll pick the Tigers because Tigers eat Blue Jays, right? I mean, that's the idea. And I don't know exactly what you do when a cowboy plays a kangaroo. If that's I'm not sure who you pick there. you could have a discussion about that sort of thing. Or maybe you might pick things based upon what uniform you like, or whether or not whether you've ever been to that campus, or whether you know somebody who went there. And so these things can get pretty silly. But if you pick based upon seedings, you will do better on average than pretty much any other, what should I call it? Any other low information picking scheme. And that's where it gets interesting, because in the long run, you are winning, but you will never win an individual bracket, because there's always going to be somebody who happens to get some of the outliers right. So it's an odd thing, because the metric of trying to win more games in the long run doesn't really help you in the short run. What you really need to do is you need to do something where you where you build a data model based upon actual team information. You have to know how well they shoot 3-pointers, and how good the defenses are against long shots, or whether they have big guys that can rebound, or whether they have good ball handlers, or all those kinds of things. And therefore you can go outside of the low information seeding component, which is a good piece, but it's not the only piece. And then you can come up with a better way. But that's really hard to do, because that information is it's hard to quantify, and people have been doing that for years, trying to come up with ways to win tournaments. And as far as I know, there's not somebody out there who is making loads of money on the tournament by picking correctly from those based on their model. So the idea of expectation, that's what it's called in statistics and mathematics. The idea that you're going to pick the one that is more likely to win based upon something like seeding, that helps you in a long run situation, but it doesn't seem to help you in a short run. All right, so that's the NCAA tournament idea, and the next thing is a football game that happened, I think this last weekend. The Detroit Lions were in the NFC Championship game for the first time in 100 million years, since 1957, I think, and they were playing San Francisco. And the question comes up, do you go for 2 after you score a touchdown? Or do you take the easy thing, which is to kick the ball through the uprights and get 1? Or do you go for 2, where you take the ball and you try to run it in or pass it in, like a regular play? Do you do that? Do you go for 2 or 1? And then the other thing is, given that it's 4th down and maybe you only have a yard to go, should you take the risk of trying to get the first down by running a play, or should you concede and punt the ball away and play some defense? And the Lions, in the game against San Francisco, they were in field goal position twice, 3 times actually. They were in field goal position 3 times, with being 4th down, and 1 time they went to kick the field goal and they got the 3 points. That was in the first half. And the other 2 times they went for it and failed to convert, failed to make the line to gain, as they say. And, you can ask why you would do such a thing. Shouldn't you play very conservative? And the coach there, the Detroit coach, has made I don't know, career, but he's got quite a reputation for being very aggressive, which means trying to get the first down on 4th down. And in a certain sense, that kind of bit those guys in the game, in the NFC Championship game. And you can say, well, if why would you go for it on fourth down? And there's a couple of reasons they went for it. One is to keep the ball away from the other team. It's not impossible, but it's very hard to score if you don't have the ball. The other thing is that if you can keep the ball, you're more likely to get a touchdown on that drive and get 6 points instead of just 3. And then the long-term question is one of just trying to win the game. The more points you score, the more likely you are to win. Generally, the longer you keep the ball, that's an indicator of winning. And so Detroit was trying to do all those things. And in 2 out of those 3 situations, they missed. And in the end, the Lions lost by 3 points. So either of the field goals that they did not attempt, if either one would have been in, you can make an argument that the score would have been tied. And we would have gone to overtime. And maybe that's a 50-50 proposition, but it's not a 0-100 proposition when the game ends and you have fewer points. So, like I said, their coach is known for a very aggressive style, and that has served them well in the regular season, certainly the last 2 or 3 years. They've made a name for themselves for being very aggressive and very, aggressive, certainly on fourth down and going for 2, that sort of thing. And it's easy for me to sit here and talk about hindsight, what's 2020, right? And I won't say that that this guy was overly flippant with his decision to go for it on fourth down, because in the first half he kicked the field goal from the 2-yard line. So it was a chip shot field goal. It was very easily made, given 3 points. And there's no guarantee, had they kicked the other 2, that they would have made them. And there's no guarantee that if they made them, it wouldn't have caused the strategy of the remainder of the game to change, right? So all those things are in there, and I'm well aware of that. But I want to think about this question, all right? And this is one of those things that you can say what you want about other sports. There's no question in my mind. There's no question that football's the best sport out there. And the reason I say that isn't because it takes big fat guys and runs them around. Certainly they are not the most athletic people, not all of them. Certainly they are not the smartest people, not all of them. But the strategy and the, I guess, just the mind games that are going on the field with coaching staffs and with quarterbacks and defensive coordinators and all those guys making these decisions in real time while the clock is ticking down to get the snap off. There's not a lot of time to make these kinds of decisions. And a lot of times questions come up that people aren't really sure nobody really knows. How often should you go for 2? How often should you kick the field goal or attempt the field goal instead of going for it on fourth down? Where's that cutoff line for your kicker? Does it make a lot of difference if you're playing on a wet field? Should you kick from which hash? Should you, how should you strategize this game? And they've been playing this game for 100 years, and no one really knows exactly what these strategies are. Now, I know baseball has gotten analytics lately over the last several decades, and it has really changed the tenor of baseball. And a lot of people have claimed it has changed it for the worst. Things like the shift in baseball have taken a lot of small ball out of the game. Defenses know where you are going to hit the ball, so they tend to put their defenders there. And people are saying that we should abolish the shift to make it illegal for people to stand in certain places. And I don't know. My general thought is, learn to hit the opposite way, I guess. I mean, these guys are really good players. They should learn to hit the opposite way. Or, maybe there's an idea. How about lowering the mound? There you go. They have done that before. And so there are ways around these things other than these rules about arbitrary places you can and cannot stand at certain times in the game. But with regard to kicking on fourth down, or not kicking, going for it, not punting, it's not obvious how to make that call. And what's typically done in these situations, as far as I can understand it, is that there are people out there, I'll call them analytics people, that will do a thing, and they'll say, at this point in the game, Detroit had the ball, so Detroit has a certain probability of winning the game. And what we did is we ran, in the split second that it takes for them to set the ball and call the play, the analytics people have run 10,000 simulations of the remainder of the game, and then they look at something called the percent of victory function, right? So like they may say something like we ran these 10,000 simulations, and we saw that the victory percentage went from 53.6% to 55.8%, and that's an increase. When the team went for it on fourth down, we saw that little tick up there, and therefore we think you should go for it. And it's certainly possible that that is what has happened, but the question really comes to one of is that the right metric to use to measure what you have? Because that is a long-term metric, a lot like the NCAA tournament picking. And, we're not playing a long-term metric. I may get, if I'm playing these tournaments, I'm almost 60 and I'm not going to get more than about, I can't imagine me getting 40 more tournaments. And I'm not going to get 10,000 of them. And not only that, but like in the concept of the tournament bracket, the metric may or may not be percentage of games won over the course of my lifetime. It's the percentage of games that I got right this time in this tournament. So the question is, in this tournament with these teams playing in these games at these locations on these days, which is the one that I think will win? And a similar thing happens with the football game. All right. So that game that was played in San Francisco on Sunday night, that was one game. That was not 10,000 games, and that the winner was determined by who won the most. There's a great quote from the movie Miracle. The coach says, the Soviets are a great team. If we play them 10 times, they might win 9, but not tonight. He says, this is not, there are things that are floating around here that are not just analytics. Okay. So this metric of long-term averaging is called expectation. It is a, this idea that if you did it 10,000 times, what would happen? And in probability and statistics, that's one of a number of metrics that you can use. You instead of looking at average outcome, you could look at something like, you could do a mini-max outcome where you try to pick the outcome that minimizes the worst case. There's a maxi-min, which maximize the worst case and minimize the best case, however those work. But you might try to say, well, I want to, like, when you're kicking the field goal, there's a chance when you kick that you're going to get 0. But there's also a chance, that chance though is, you want that chance to be small. And the probability distribution of points from this drive, right? It has a certain amount of mass on 0, a certain amount of mass on 6, a certain amount of mass on 7, a certain amount of mass on 8. And you're playing with a distribution there, not just with an average, but you're playing with a whole distribution, because in a whole game, you're not going to get 10,000 drives. You're going to get a dozen. And that drive, that day, right now, right, when you're playing the game, that's the drive that matters. So to talk about expectation and talk about all the different outcomes that could happen that aren't going to happen seems to be kind of a silly thing to do. So that's one concern I have. And the other one is what's the data model? Okay, so there's a model and it says, if you are up by this much with this amount of time left in the game and you're a good team and the other team's a good team, how will the game fall out? And you have to build a model for that thing. And I have to believe that the model includes things like, what's your won-loss record? Where are you on the field? Do you still have your kicker? Are you having your first string quarterback? Is your second string quarterback? Are they injured? Are they not? But what's not, I don't think momentum is in the model. And I don't think getting the wind knocked out of your sails, I don't think that's in the model either. After that first miss that Detroit made, after first failing to make the fourth down, make the first down on the fourth down. Okay, that's a miss of conversion, not a miss of a field goal. After that first failure to make first down, San Francisco took the ball on a long drive going the other way and scored a touchdown. All right. And they cut the lead to 7 points at that point. The lead had been as much as 17. They'd cut it to 7. And that included a miracle catch where the receiver and the defensive back got their feet tied up with each other. The ball bounced off the helmet of the defensive back, and the offensive guy made a miracle catch, one that you will continue to see in highlight videos from now until eternity. And then after they scored that, Detroit got the ball back and then fumbled, and then San Francisco scored again to tie the game. So that sequence of events changes. I mean, it changes the guys playing the game are not robots. They're human beings undergoing all sorts of emotional issues. And part of the game is to try to not be victim to that, is to say, well, we got to go and keep doing what we're doing. And the Lions did make a drive after that, and they came close to scoring again, and they went for it again on fourth down and failed to get that one. So there are things that should be in the model that we cannot measure. All right, momentum, hope and despair. Okay, how are people using those in their models? All right, so this I'm coming. See, this is where I'm coming back to this classical bufnagle stuff. Is that the materialist mindset believes that there's only out there what we can touch and feel and smell and taste and hear, that those are the only things. Okay, but we know, those of us who listen to this podcast and read the good books and that sort of thing, we know that there are other things that are out there. There are things like courage, right, which you cannot measure or taste or feel or smell. There's honor, there's virtue, and there's justice, and those kinds of things. And in the context of the NFC Championship game being played on the road by the Detroit Lions in San Francisco, there's two other big things out there, and one of them is hope, and one of them is despair. And humanity is not just in the material realm. We're not just atomic little billiard balls, following little Newtonian models. We're not little physics formulas. We are human beings with all of these things inside us. And we know that there are more than just these material things out there because we can sense it. We can feel it. Anybody who watched that, anybody who's played the game and watched that game could feel it was like a change in the wind went through that stadium. And it must have been, if you're a Niners fan, it had to have been like the greatest. It had to have been a great feeling. And if you're a Lions fan, it just felt like the air is going out of your balloon, right? And it's a sense. You can feel that momentum or wind in the sails, whatever you want to call it, okay? And sometimes those fancy formulas that are out there, they are just computer games. Sometimes a man must fight his dragons. And in that realm, which is the one that we live in, hope and despair are very real things. That is real stuff. And until the computer models get that in them, they will continue to be simply tools to try to get us close, and we won't be able to do what we really need to do. So, hey, let's tell the analytic guys to get to put those things in their models. And in the meantime, we're going to ask all you to seek the good, live virtuously and flourish, and enjoy the adventure of life.